Welcome to my channel. Today's story is an epic tale of how humanity's so-called primitive weapons shattered an unstoppable galactic fleet. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to subscribe for more. The Galactic Empire's fleet arrived in Earth's orbit like an unstoppable force of nature, monolithic warships gleaming with the eerie glow of deflector shields. Their commanders, secure in their superiority, broadcast their warnings openly, demanding unconditional surrender. The people of Earth had seen empires before, but never one that spanned the stars. And yet, in their arrogance, the invaders underestimated the one thing that had kept humanity alive through centuries of war: adaptation. Colonel Jack Hayes stood atop an observation deck at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, staring at the grim horizon. Smoke billowed from the nearest city, set ablaze by the Empire's initial bombardment. The sheer speed and scale of the attack had left military leaders scrambling. Fighters had been deployed, missiles fired. None had made a dent in the enemy's defenses. Shields, Hayes thought bitterly, shaking his head. A technological barrier that rendered their most advanced aircraft and weaponry useless. Behind him, Captain Troy Mitchell and Master Sergeant Rick Bear Dalton studied the latest battle reports, their faces illuminated by the glow of a command terminal. Mitchell sighed, rubbing a hand over his short-cropped hair. "We lost another 2 squadrons trying to hit those destroyers. They're shrugging off everything we throw at them." Dalton, built like a brawler but sharp as a scalpel when it came to weapons, grunted. "Same story. Shields hold strong, then their plasma cannons wipe us out before we can reposition. It's a slaughter." Lieutenant David Carter, the youngest of the group, but a genius in weapons analysis, frowned at the holographic projections of their enemies' ships. "They rely entirely on their shields," he murmured, his mind already turning over potential weaknesses. Hayes finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of years spent in the battlefield. "They didn't expect resistance. They see us as primitives, fighting with museum pieces," he said, recalling the Empire's taunting transmission. "That means they haven't accounted for the way we fight." The base trembled as another distant explosion rumbled through the air. Hayes turned to Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Torres, who had been overseeing their last functional anti-aircraft batteries. "How long can we keep those guns firing?" Torres wiped sweat from his brow, his fatigues stained with grease and gunpowder. "As long as we got ammo, sir. But these cannons weren't built for this kind of fight. Against conventional aircraft? Sure. But shielded alien warships? We're throwing rocks at a tank." Hayes nodded. The problem wasn't firepower, it was penetration. If they couldn't get past the shields, nothing else mattered. He looked at Carter, who was still analyzing the enemy's technology. "Lieutenant, I need a reason to believe we're not wasting our time. Is there any way to punch through?" Carter hesitated. "I don't have enough data yet. But if we could get a closer look, maybe a downed fighter or a ship that took damage, we might find something exploitable." Mitchell exhaled sharply. "So what? We wait until they give us a souvenir." Before anyone could respond, the base's sirens wailed, a shrill, urgent sound. Radar techs shouted over one another, their voices panicked. "Incoming fire. Plasma bombardment detected." Hayes snapped into action. "Brace for impact." The ground shook violently as an orbital strike carved a molten scar across the landscape, obliterating the southern end of the airfield. The blast wave sent debris flying, shattering windows, tossing vehicles like toys. Men scrambled for cover, shielding their heads as secondary explosions rippled through the base. Torres coughed through the dust, helping a stunned soldier to his feet. "They're trying to wipe us out before we can regroup." Hayes pulled himself up, brushing dirt from his uniform. His ears rang, but his mind remained clear. The Empire was pressing its advantage. If they didn't adapt, now, there wouldn't be a next move. "Get me a line to any pilots still in the air," Hayes barked. "We need eyes on the battlefield. If we can bait one of those fighters into crashing, we might get the intel we need." Mitchell was already on it, barking orders into his radio. "This is Mitchell. Any pilots still airborne, break from direct combat and force those fighters low. Repeat, force them into a chase. Draw them into our AA grid. The response came almost instantly. This is Ghost Leader, we copy. Initiating pursuit maneuver now. Minutes later, the first flickers of hope emerged. Empire fighters, cocky in their superiority, pursued human pilots too close to the ground, where the thick atmosphere and terrain made their precision systems less effective. That was when the anti-aircraft batteries, old by modern military standards, but still lethal, roared to life. Flak rounds filled the sky, forcing the alien ships into tighter maneuvers. One miscalculation, one clipped wing, and then, target down. We have an enemy fighter down in grid 12. Hayes didn't waste a second. Carter, Dalton, Torres, you're with me. We're going to see what our guest has to teach us. As they raced toward the crash site, the first crack in the Empire's invulnerability had appeared. Humanity, dismissed as a relic of the past, had just taken its first step toward turning the tide. The wreckage still smoked as Colonel Hayes and his team arrived at the crash site. The Empire's fighter had plowed deep into the earth, carving a jagged trench through the forest before coming to a rest against the smoldering remains of an oak tree. Its sleek, obsidian-like hull shimmered even in its ruined state, but for all its alien craftsmanship, it was just another downed aircraft now, proof that the Empire wasn't invincible. Carter was the first to approach, his eyes scanning the debris like a man looking for the answer to a puzzle. Intact power core remnants of shield generators, this is exactly what we need. Dalton crouched beside the wreckage, running a hand over the scorched metal. You think there's anything left in here worth salvaging? Only one way to find out, Carter replied. He pried open a shattered panel, revealing the ship's inner workings, a tangled mess of conduits, flickering circuits, and alien tech that had no business being on Earth. His fingers moved with practiced precision, disconnecting components, pulling apart shielding mechanisms. Hayes stood watch, rifle in hand, scanning the trilene for movement. Make it quick. We just pissed off a galactic empire. They'll come looking. Carter grunted as he yanked free what looked like the fighter's main shield modulator. Got it. He turned to the others, his excitement barely restrained. This is the key. Their shields aren't just energy barriers. They operate on a frequency modulation system, constantly shifting to absorb different types of attacks. But if we hit them with rapid, sustained kinetic impacts at the right frequency. Torres folded his arms. You're saying we can overload them? Exactly, Carter nodded. They designed their shields to counter energy weapons. They never planned for brute force. If we can adjust our weapons to cycle through the right frequencies, we can break through. Dalton smirked. So, you're telling me all we need to do is hit them hard enough, fast enough, and in just the right way? Sounds like my kind of fight. Hayes didn't waste time on celebration. Then let's get to work. The clock's ticking. They moved fast, hauling the salvaged components back to base. The airfield was still battered from a previous bombardment, but the surviving engineers and weapons teams were already working to rebuild. As soon as Carter and Dalton returned, they set up a makeshift lab, spreading the captured tech across a steel work table. We need to retrofit our weapons, Carter said, pushing aside a ruined circuit board. Modern missiles rely on explosive payloads, but they're too slow to keep up with the shield's frequency shifts. We need something with high enough velocity and sustained impact, something that won't give their shields time to adjust. Dalton cracked his knuckles. Then we bring out the old war dogs. He turned to Torres. How many of those museum-piece anti-aircraft guns do we have left? Torres thought for a moment. Enough. M2 Brownings, Vulcan cannons, even a couple of old flak 88s collecting dust. But those things aren't made for space-age combat. Doesn't matter, Dalton said. We upgrade them. Link their firing systems to Carter's data, make them cycle through the shield's weak points in real time. If we hit fast enough and hard enough, those fancy shields won't mean a damn thing. Mitchell, who had been listening quietly, leaned forward. If this works, we're going to need pilots who can fly in tight enough to make use of it. Our fighters can't take a hit from those plasma cannons, so we'll have to be precise. Hayes locked eyes with his team. Then we test it now. No more theory, no more waiting. The Empire won't give us that luxury. Within hours, the first modified anti-aircraft weapons were in position. Carter had worked at breakneck speed, rigging an old Vulcan cannon with an upgraded targeting system that could adjust firing patterns on the fly. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty. But if it worked, it didn't have to be. As night fell, the Empire returned. Their ships glided through the sky with eerie precision, their glowing underbellies illuminating the ruins of the battlefield. They weren't bombarding this time. They were scouting, searching, hunting. The humans had struck a nerve, and the Empire wanted blood. Hayes and his team crouched in the shadows of a makeshift bunker. The first enemy fighter banked low over the airfield, scanning for signs of resistance. "Wait for it," Hayes muttered. The moment the fighter passed over their position, Torres squeezed the trigger. The Vulcan cannon roared to life, a thunderous eruption of steel and fire. A hailstorm of high-velocity rounds slammed into the fighter's shields, and for the first time, the shimmering energy barrier flickered, then failed. The rounds tore through the alien hull, shredding it in a cascade of burning metal. The fighter spiraled out of control before crashing into the ground in a violent explosion. Silence followed. Then cheers erupted through the radio. It worked. Carter gasped. "We broke through." The celebration was short-lived. More ships descended, their formations tightening. They had realized the attack wasn't a fluke. Hayes spoke calmly into his radio. "All units, fire at will." The night sky lit up as anti-aircraft guns blazed, filling the darkness with relentless streams of kinetic fury. The once invincible warships jerked under the barrage, their shields failing under the sheer, unrelenting force. One by one, the Empire's ships fell, engulfed in flame, broken, shattered. From the ground, Mitchell watched in awe. They thought we were primitives. They thought their tech made them untouchable. He shook his head, smiling grimly. "Looks like they were wrong." Hayes exhaled, watching another enemy ship explode midair. This was just the beginning. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time since the invasion began, humanity wasn't just surviving. They were fighting back. The sun rose over a battlefield littered with the wreckage of alien ships. Smoke curled into the sky from still-burning husks, the remnants of what had once been an invincible fleet. The Empire had underestimated Earth, and now, for the first time in its history, it was retreating. But Hayes knew better than to celebrate too soon. The war was far from over. Inside the command bunker, the team gathered around a holographic map of Earth, marking enemy positions. The Empire's fleet had pulled back to high orbit, no doubt reassessing its strategy, but reconnaissance drones had spotted movement, new formations, heavier ships, a shift in tactics. They weren't done. They were adapting. "They're learning from us," Carter said, scrolling through intercepted data streams. "The new ships have reinforced shields, more rapid frequency modulation. Our current setup won't be enough." Dalton leaned back, arms crossed. "So what? We just keep upgrading. They patch a hole, we poke a new one." "That's exactly what we do," Hayes said. "That's what humans have always done." Mitchell tapped the table, his brow furrowed. "Problem is, we're still on defense. If we let them dictate the fight, they'll eventually outgun us. We need to hit them first." Torres nodded. "I say we take the fight to them. Turn their own arrogance against them." A plan began to form. They couldn't match the Empire's firepower ship for ship, but they didn't have to. The key was precision, hitting them where it hurt, forcing them to spread their forces thin. "We modify our air units," Mitchell said. "Get the A-10s back in the sky. Equip them with the new targeting systems. Those cannons can chew through armor. We just need to get them close enough." "And we set up kill zones," Dalton added. "Turn every major city into a death trap for anything that tries to land. Railgun emplacements, modified anti-aircraft batteries, old missile systems, we use everything." Carter pulled up data on their remaining resources. "We've still got some of the old Cold War railgun prototypes in storage. If we modify them, they'll punch straight through even the heavy dreadnoughts. Hayes didn't hesitate. Then let's get to work. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. The next 48 hours were a blur of motion. Engineers worked around the clock, stripping old war machines for parts, welding together new weapons from decades-old designs. What had once been relics of past wars became Earth's best chance at survival. Mitchell personally oversaw the modifications to the A-10s, watching as mechanics fitted the aircraft with new targeting systems and high-velocity, armor-piercing rounds. The Empire had laughed at ballistic weapons. Soon, they'd learned their mistake. Dalton and Torres coordinated ground defenses, turning entire city blocks into hardened fortresses. Rail guns were mounted atop skyscrapers, their barrels long and menacing, while modified flak cannons lined the streets, waiting for the next wave of invaders. Carter worked tirelessly to refine their targeting algorithms, pushing the system to predict shield fluctuations before they happened. The goal was simple: maximize damage before the enemy could react. By the time the next attack came, Earth was ready. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. The first wave arrived under the cover of darkness, sleek warships descending like hungry predators. Plasma cannons flared, lighting up the night sky, but this time, humanity wasn't caught off guard. Railguns thundered from the rooftops, their slugs traveling at hypersonic speeds. The first direct hit punched through an enemy cruiser, ripping straight through its shield and into its core. A heartbeat later, it detonated, a shockwave splitting the sky. From the air, Mitchell's squadron raced through the battlefield, their A-10s hugging the terrain. Alien fighters swooped in to intercept, but Earth's pilots had learned their patterns. With pinpoint accuracy, the Warthog's cannons shredded through enemy armor, sending ships spiraling to the ground. Dalton's kill zones turned entire landing sites into death traps. Empire troops that managed to touch down found themselves in a nightmare of overlapping machine gun fire, tripwired explosives, and relentless artillery. They had come expecting a conquest. Instead, they had landed in hell. From the command bunker, Hayes watched the battle unfold. His plan was working, but the Empire wasn't giving up. New contacts incoming, a radio operator called out. Heavy dreadnought advancing fast. The main event had arrived. The massive warship cut through the battlefield like a moving fortress, its shields glowing a deep crimson. The Empire had learned. This ship had been reinforced, adapted to counter the weapons that had already claimed so many of its brethren. That thing's going to tear through our lines, Torres muttered. Not if we hit it first, Hayes said. Bring the rail guns online. Target the core. Carter worked quickly, recalibrating the targeting systems to adjust for the dreadnought's improved defenses. Every second counted. Outside, the railgun teams adjusted their sights, waiting for the order. The dreadnought's plasma cannons powered up, energy gathering for a devastating strike. Hayes gave the command. Fire. The railguns roared as one, their slugs streaking through the air at impossible speeds. The first shot slammed into the dreadnought's shield, causing it to flare violently. The second hit moments later, weakening it further. Then the third. The shield wavered, flickering, struggling to compensate. The fourth shot struck home. The slug punched straight through the dreadnought's core. For a moment, it hung there, motionless, as if refusing to accept its fate. Then a chain reaction ignited within its depths. The ship erupted from the inside out, flames and metal raining down over the battlefield. A stunned silence followed. Then a voice crackled over the radio. Target destroyed. The war was still raging, but humanity had just delivered a message the Empire couldn't ignore. They weren't just fighting back. They were winning. The battlefield lay in smoldering ruin, but the war was far from over. Smoke curled into the sky where the Empire's dreadnought had once loomed, its shattered remains now scattered across the landscape. The victory was undeniable, but Hayes knew the enemy wouldn't retreat quietly. They had underestimated humanity once. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. In the command bunker, the air was thick with tension. Carter stood over a flickering holographic display, eyes locked on the orbital readings. They've stopped advancing. No new landings, no bombardments. Just holding position. Dalton exhaled sharply. They're regrouping, licking their wounds, which means we've bought time, but not much. Mitchell leaned forward, arms resting on the table. So what's the play? We sit back and wait for their next move, or do we make one of our own? Hayes didn't hesitate. We strike first. The room fell silent. Torres was the first to speak. You want to take the fight to their fleet? Hayes nodded. We've proven their shields can be broken. We've adapted. Now we push them back before they have a chance to adapt again. He turned to Carter. Tell me we've got something that can hit them in orbit. Carter's fingers flew across the console, pulling up schematics. We've still got a few functional ICBMs, nuclear warheads designed for high-atmosphere detonation. But they weren't built to counter shielded ships. If we can modify them, sync them with our frequency cycling tech. Then we can punch through, Torres finished. Dalton grinned. I like it, but we'll need a distraction, something to keep them busy while the missiles get in range. Mitchell cracked his knuckles. Leave that to me. Within hours, the airfield was alive with motion. Engineers swarmed over missile silos, retrofitting warheads with the latest targeting systems. Pilots prepared for one final push, modifying their aircraft to carry the heaviest payloads they could manage. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about taking back the skies. The Empire's fleet hovered in low orbit, its remaining warships forming a tight defensive line. They weren't retreating, but they weren't advancing either. They were waiting, watching, calculating. That changed the moment Earth's forces launched their assault. From hidden launch sites, waves of aircraft took to the sky, weaving between clouds as they climbed toward the enemy. The Empire responded instantly. Squadrons of alien fighters broke formation, screaming toward the human pilots with renewed aggression. Plasma fire lit up the night, turning the sky into a deadly web of light and destruction. Mitchell led the charge, his A-10 weaving through the chaos, cannons roaring. Alien ships exploded around him, but he never slowed. His squadron pushed higher, forcing the Empire to engage them, drawing their attention away from the real threat. From the ground, Hayes watched as the first modified missile launched. It cut through the air like a spear, engines burning white-hot as it raced toward the fleet. The Empire's ships shifted, their shields flaring as they prepared to intercept. Then the second missile launched. Then the third. Then the fourth. Carter's modifications worked flawlessly. Each warhead adjusted mid-flight, cycling through frequencies at lightning speed. The enemy shields flickered, struggled, then failed. The first detonation lit up the sky. The blast engulfed a cruiser, tearing it apart from inside out. The shockwave rippled through the fleet, and before they could react, the second warhead struck home. Then the third. The Empire's formation shattered. Dalton hooped over the radio. We're doing it. We're pushing them back. But Hayes wasn't celebrating yet. His eyes remained locked on the largest ship still standing, a dreadnought at the heart of the fleet, its engines already shifting, preparing to leave orbit. They're retreating, Torres muttered. They know they've lost. Hayes keyed his radio. Not yet, they haven't. Mitchell's voice came through, breathless but determined. Say the word, Colonel. Hayes stared at the screen. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. Send them a message, he said. Make sure they never come back. Mitchell grinned, banking hard toward the retreating dreadnought. His remaining missiles locked on, his cannons still burning hot. The ship tried to raise its shields, but it was too late. The last barrage tore through its hull, setting off a chain reaction that engulfed it in fire. The Empire was gone. The skies belonged to Earth once more. As the last enemy vessel disappeared into the void, a hush fell over the battlefield. Then, slowly, the realization settled in. They had won. Dalton let out a low whistle. Damn, we actually did it. Carter leaned back, exhausted. They'll remember this. They'll remember that humans don't go down easy. Hayes exhaled, watching the first light of dawn break over the horizon. No, he said. They'll remember that we don't go down at all.